Western North America is a special place. Few places on Earth can boast a similar combination of majestic landscapes, abundant and diverse wildlife, and world-class outdoor recreation. Native Americans relied on the West's vast natural resources for survival. Pioneers stood in awe of the seemingly endless herds of bison, elk, deer, pronghorn, and other species. To those early settlers, the West's wildlife must have seemed infinite. But as this region was settled, early conservationists and wildlife managers realized they were anything but.
The settlement in the West has had varying effects on fish and wildlife. For example, caribou are disappearing. They're a threatened species. The opening up of the West had not been good for caribou at all. For other species like deer, the opening up and proper game management has actually been very good for them. We've had many success stories. We've had other challenges with endangered species. The sage grouse is an example, with development on the prairie and its effect on the prairie grasslands. Sage grouse have been a species that's been difficult to recover.
In the early 1900s, most Western state fish and wildlife agencies were in their infancy. They realized that something needed to be done to conserve and manage the region's dwindling wildlife. So state governments throughout the West began enacting fish and wildlife laws. They established game commissions and structured agencies to enforce wildlife laws and established hunting and fishing seasons. States also felt there might be a threat to their sovereignty over managing wildlife on the vast lands of the West. Representatives from Western game agencies met in Salt Lake City in 1922 to form the Western Association of State Game Commissioners. Their goal was to band together to coordinate regional issues and avoid the threat of the federal government taking over. Dave Madsen of Utah was elected the first president of the association. Their objectives were ambitious and focused.
The origin of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies really has its roots in the early 1920s, 1922 to be specific, at a time when there was a very strong belief, and in fact the reality of the situation was that there was a strong federal push underway to assume management responsibility for all wildland resources on the public lands in this part of the country. That was something that was not acceptable to these fledgling state fish and wildlife agencies. And so 7 agency representatives, both administrators and game wardens from 7 states, decided to convene in Salt Lake City to see what could be done about it.
Early on, the association was dedicated to being a strong advocate of the rights of states and provinces to retain full management control of resident game species. The association quickly opposed passage of the federal hunting license bill because it would have diverted state dollars from hunters to federal programs. The association also opposed a federal regulation it thought would infringe on a state's right to solely establish hunting seasons, bag limits, and license structure on federal lands. And the association was also one of the first organizations to support using excise tax on sporting equipment to augment other funds for wildlife conservation and management. While much of the early work of the association was focused on conflicts with the federal government, over time, this relationship has matured into a partnership focused on benefits to fish and wildlife resources.
And I think the working relationships now have really improved. And part of that, I think, is because the Western and all of the associations for that matter, the Southeast, the Northeast, Western, Midwest associations, all went together, and under the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies banner, we made a concerted effort through a series of resolutions to work more closely than ever with the federal organization. So I think today we are much better off in terms of our working agreements. The communication is better. The opportunity to work on things that are controversial like climate change and the water allocations in the West, all of that, I think, is much better, and I hope that we don't let it kind of backslide in the way that it was, because it was sometimes somewhat contentious, but much better working relationships, even to the point of looking at federal agencies' budgets and making suggestions through the Western Association, which then goes to the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and then back to the federal agencies. Our ability to do cost sharing, partnerships, our ability to put together things that at the local level that the federal organizations may not have the mechanics to do, those are all strong relationships, and I think they've really come a long way.
By the 1940s, the association's mission and activities began to broaden. It established annual meetings for commissioners and directors. Researchers and managers within the agencies also began meeting regularly to exchange important information about conserving and managing wildlife in the West.
When you go back in history to the predecessor organization of WAFWA, which was organized in 1922, most of the focus at that point was simply on passing hunting and fishing laws, largely regulating the take of fish and wildlife. And in addition to that, there was a lot of work being done on maintaining the authority and developing the authority for states to manage the fish and wildlife, the resident fish and wildlife in their respective states. But as years have gone on, the management issues have gotten much more complex, and as a result of that, there's been a need for more scientific research to support the decisions being made by the states as they consider various management issues within their borders. And the Western Association has been very important in creating opportunities for the Western states to get together and to share their research results. They've put together a whole series of forums and workshops and committees that have brought together scientists and managers from the states to discuss problems like big game management, habitat management, public access, those kinds of things. And it's really been a benefit to all the states. And so WAFWA has and continues to be a very important player in that arena.
It was 1957 when the association changed its name to the Western Association of State Game and Fish Commissioners. The name change reflected a growing emphasis on fisheries programs in the West. Then in 1978, the association again changed its name to the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and that's the name that exists today. Over the years, the Western Association has invested in a number of projects, including the development of the Project Wild program in 1979. It still captures the imagination of teachers and students to help shape conservation education nationwide.
The thing that's made Project Wild a success is that it hasn't been and won't be seen as simply a teach kids to hunt and fish program, which gives it a much broader acceptance among school teachers and school administrators and the places that you have to go to get curriculum developed into the program. It teaches kids not what to think. It's not value laden about hunting or killing or use or any of those things. It's about wildlife ecology. It's about a much broader picture, and that gives people a foundation that they can then, as they grow on and get different experiences with wildlife, they can figure out who the good guys are and what needs to happen politically, socially, to keep healthy wildlife around.
In 1985, the association developed a program to respond to public demands on our natural resources. It was called the Responsive Management Program. It uses scientific survey techniques to gauge public opinions and attitudes so agencies can better tailor their management programs to meet public demands and improve their performance. There was another big step in 1999. The association began using Memoranda of Understanding among member agencies to help conserve and manage sensitive species like the black-tailed prairie dog, Townsend's big-eared bat, and sage grouse. The move set a new precedent. The result has been more plans, protocols, and habitat standards to benefit these animals and keep them from being listed under the Endangered Species Act. The association has also been leading research on genetics, promoting better conservation, and working on agreements with federal agencies to help change the landscape so more species can benefit. Within the last decade, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife has led the country in using human dimensions research to make wildlife management more accurate. One groundbreaking study focused on understanding public values about wildlife in the West. That information is helping member states to better plan for the future of wildlife management, even with rapid changes in population.
Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has been a leader in advancing human dimensions of wildlife, fish and wildlife. It goes back to the 80s when they introduced the notion of responsive management and set up the organization Responsive Management, which has flourished since that time, but also more recently they've reached out and gotten involved in doing an array of trainings and studies through universities and other organizations that's really led human dimensions like, quite frankly, no other place, no other of the associations has done. You know, it's a treat to work with the Western agencies. They have a curiosity about the social component of wildlife management. They learn quickly. They want to increase human dimensions within their ranks. And it's just a pleasure to work in that partnership with them.
Wildlife management in the West is born out of the principles of the North American model of wildlife management. Today, the association is dedicated to educate the public about the history and continuing importance of the model.
At the time the founders of the model actually started to prescribe its goals, wildlife was decimated. It was perhaps North American wildlife's darkest hour. That would be the turn of the 19th century. At the end of the 1800s, market hunting had really depleted wildlife populations from what they were in pre-settlement era. And the reason this model is so important is it provided a sense of ownership in the public for wildlife and a sense of utility in knowing that they could use wildlife. And so it was this concept that really created a sense of ownership in the general public that caused conservation to happen. And we basically moved wildlife populations from what were their all-time low at the beginning of the 1900s to a successful recovery of all of those populations today. The North American model is absolutely relevant today. It's currently practiced across the continent still by all state and provincial wildlife agencies. And maybe the best way to explain its relevancy is what model would do a better job than what we're doing now. There isn't another model that is being proffered or considered that could do a better job than the North American model has done for 150 years. And those principles are still being practiced across the continent and proven themselves time and again to be successful.
The association is also taking on dozens of other projects and has become an unprecedented resource for fish and wildlife agencies in the West.
There's an old saying that, that your chain is as strong as the weakest link. Well, I think in this case, the more links you have in the chain, the stronger your organization is. And with 23 states and provinces in the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, when that organization makes a statement, I think it's very, very powerful. It's powerful politically. We can take that statement or that position and go the political route, go to the delegations, go to the administration, go to the governors, and say, the Western states are in unison, and this is a problem, or this is an issue, or this is something that we would like to do, and we'd like to have your support. So that's how that the value of the Western transposes into power.
Western North America faces a challenging and uncertain future. Development, human population growth, invasive species, climate change, and other issues put intense pressure on the region's wildlife and its habitats. These are common issues shared among the 23 states and provincial members of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. As wildlife managers deal with these challenges, the role of the association will become more important than ever.